Europe, 1944. The Allied invasion of Normandy had succeeded, but victory was strangled by supply lines. German generals mocked the Americans, calling their logistics a joke, their trucks amateurs in chaos. Yet what came next would silence that laughter. A bold, relentless convoy of men and machines, the Red Ball Express, would fuel Patton's unstoppable advance across France. Before we begin, subscribe to honor the untold stories of history, because buried beneath the triumph lies a forgotten miracle of war. Europe, 1943. The continent stood in ruins beneath the iron heel of Nazi domination. From the beaches of Brittany to the ruins of Stalingrad, the world held its breath. Hitler's armies seemed unstoppable, their banners casting long shadows over a dying continent. But far across the Atlantic, another storm was brewing, one that would soon test not only courage in battle, but the sheer will of industrial endurance. In America, factories thundered day and night. Sparks lit the skies of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Chicago as steel became tanks, ships, and endless lines of trucks. For many workers, the war was still distant, a story told through newspapers and radio. But for the young men training in dusty camps, the reality was coming closer by the hour. In London, General Dwight D. Eisenhower bent over maps with tired eyes, tracing routes across France that didn't yet exist. The invasion he was planning would be the largest amphibious assault in human history, but its success would rely not just on strategy, but supply. Ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies. Every bullet and every bandage would have to move across thousands of miles of ocean and battlefield. Meanwhile, in France, German officers toasted champagne in candlelit bunkers. They believed the Americans, though brave, lacked the discipline and experience to sustain a long campaign. They fight with machines, one colonel sneered, but machines cannot think. Across the Atlantic, American generals were thinking and building faster than anyone imagined. In the quiet before the storm, there were moments of humanity. A black American driver named Private Ellis polished the hood of a deuce-and-a-half truck in a Louisiana motor pool. He didn't know where the war would take him, only that he would drive wherever ordered. Around him, thousands of other soldiers, many segregated, often overlooked, prepared for a mission that would define their generation. From the skies over England to the docks of Normandy, destiny was assembling piece by piece. Every crate packed, every tire tightened, every gallon of gasoline loaded onto ships. It was all part of an invisible promise. The calm was ending. Soon, the roads of Europe would roar with engines, and every mile forward would be bought with sweat, fuel, and blood. When the invasion finally began, would America's vast supply machine hold, or break under its own weight? June 6, 1944. Dawn broke over the beaches of Normandy, and with it came the beginning of liberation. Allied troops stormed the coast under a hail of bullets, blood mixing with surf and sand. Operation Overlord, D-Day, had begun. By nightfall, the beaches were secured. But success came with an unforeseen crisis: how to feed, fuel, and arm an army of 1 million men now pushing inland. The Germans, retreating but not defeated, knew exactly where to strike next: the Allies' supply chain. Their aircraft bombed roads, destroyed bridges, and turned France's transport network into a shattered web. With ports demolished and railways twisted in a mangled steel, supplies piled up on the beaches faster than they could move. Inside their bunkers, German generals laughed. The Americans can build, one scoffed, but they cannot move. To them, the chaos on Normandy's roads was proof of Allied incompetence. But behind the front lines, an extraordinary group of engineers and logisticians were already planning something radical, a supply system so relentless that it would change the tempo of war. Eisenhower demanded results. His armies were advancing, but without fuel, they'd stop dead. Patton's Third Army, newly unleashed, devoured gasoline faster than it could be delivered. A single tank division could consume 100,000 gallons a day. Allied engineers worked around the clock. They built temporary harbors, mulberries, to offload supplies directly onto beaches. They repaired roads and bridges faster than enemy aircraft could destroy them. And yet, the growing tide of men and material required something greater. A lifeline, a constant stream of motion between the ports of Normandy and the Roaring Front. That idea came to life in a single, desperate meeting. What if we create a rolling highway? An officer proposed. A convoy that never stops. Drivers running day and night, hauling everything the front needs. It was risky, untested, and dangerous, but it was their only hope. By August 1944, the plan was approved. They called it the Red Ball Express. Its mission, move vital supplies non-stop from the coast to the heart of battle. Its drivers, thousands of young men, many African American, who would face exhaustion, enemy fire, and racial prejudice to keep the war machine alive. For now, the beaches buzzed with activity. Trucks were loaded, engines revved, and orders barked through the chaos. Every crate of ammunition, every drum of fuel, meant another step toward victory. But as the convoys prepared to roll, no one yet knew whether the experiment would work or end in catastrophe. Would ingenuity and courage overcome the impossible logistics of liberation? The beaches of Normandy were secure, but the real battle had only begun. The land ahead was scarred and hostile. Bombed villages, cratered roads, and endless mud turned France into a nightmare for supply convoys. The German army, though retreating, left a scorched path of destruction behind them. Bridges collapsed, railways sabotaged, roads mined. Patton's Third Army burst onto the scene like a lightning bolt. His tanks and half-tracks tore through German defenses, fast and furious, but dangerously dependent on fuel. Without a steady flow of gasoline, the entire advance would grind to a halt. Every truckload mattered. Each driver carried not just supplies, but the fate of the campaign. The Red Ball Express was born from this chaos, a network of trucks running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The name came from railroad slang. A red ball marked high-priority cargo. And in France, nothing was more important than fuel. Thousands of drivers, many African American, manned the convoys. They drove without headlights through blackout nights to avoid German planes. Sleep was rare, breakdowns were constant. The roads became ribbons of danger, winding through fields still littered with mines and bodies. But still they drove. In pouring rain, through enemy fire they rolled on. Mechanics turned scrap into spare parts. Field cooks set up makeshift kitchens by the roadside. Sometimes they'd pass burning towns where villagers cheered them on, waving as the trucks thundered eastward. German reconnaissance couldn't believe what they saw, or rather, what they couldn't stop. American supply convoys moved like a living organism, unstoppable despite chaos. Each mile carried its own gamble. Drivers risked death with every turn. One wrong move on a narrow road, and a truck could tumble into a ravine. Yet morale stayed high. They knew what was at stake. Every gallon delivered kept Patton's army moving, and every delay risked disaster. By mid-August, the Red Ball Express was in full motion, hauling thousands of tons of supplies daily. But as Patton's army surged ahead, could the Red Ball Express keep pace, or would fuel shortages halt the Blitz in its tracks? Late August 1944, France burned with liberation and chaos. Patton's forces raced across the countryside like unleashed fury, but speed had a cost. Tanks drank fuel faster than convoys could deliver it. Every advance stretched supply lines thinner. In Eisenhower's command tense, tension grew. No fuel, no advance, became the refrain. A single day's delay could give Germany time to regroup and counterattack. The fate of the Allied offensive now rested on the backs of truck drivers and mechanics. The Red Ball Express expanded overnight. More than 6,000 trucks joined the fleet, each marked with a red circle, the ball. The route stretched from the port of Cherbourg to the front at Chartres, a grueling 700-mile round trip. Trucks roared down designated highways, forbidden to stop for any reason. Military police cleared paths through villages, while roadside crews repaired damaged vehicles in real time. It was organized chaos, and it worked. Every 10 minutes, another convoy rolled out. Drivers slept in their seats, snatching minutes of rest between shifts. Fuel depots glowed like beacons across the darkened countryside. German generals, confident the Allies would stall, began to panic. Reports flooded in. Patton's divisions were advancing faster than any army in history. "Impossible," one officer muttered. "They should have run out of fuel days ago." But they hadn't. Against all odds, the Red Ball kept rolling. Drivers patched bullet holes with tin, swapped tires in the mud, and risked air raids with every trip. What had begun as an improvised lifeline became an unstoppable artery of war. By early September, the impossible had happened. The U.S. Army was outrunning its own supply chain, yet the supplies still came. German laughter had turned to disbelief. Every ton delivered was another defeat for the Reich. How long could the Red Ball keep rolling before exhaustion or enemy fire stopped it cold? By autumn, the Red Ball Express had become a legend, a steel serpent slithering through the dark roads of France. It never slept. Day and night, engines growled, carrying the lifeblood of war toward the front. The work was brutal. Drivers faced rain that turned roads to rivers and fog that blinded them completely. They were forbidden from using headlights. Even a spark could attract enemy fire. Some painted white lines on their windshields just to follow the truck ahead. Sleep deprivation was constant. Many drove 20-hour shifts, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. Trucks often broke down mid-route, but the convoys couldn't stop. Mechanics fixed engines under artillery fire. German forces harassed them from the air, strafing convoys and bombing bridges. The losses were staggering: hundreds of trucks destroyed, dozens of drivers killed. Yet replacements arrived daily. The system adapted, evolved, and endured. Patton's tanks consumed 800,000 gallons of fuel a day. The drivers knew every drum they delivered meant another village liberated. It wasn't glory they chased, but duty. On a moonless night near Argenton, one convoy vanished under sudden German shell fire. The horizon lit up with explosions, trucks burning like torches. Yet even as flames filled the sky, the next convoy rolled forward, weaving through wreckage to reach the front. They called it the longest night. But when dawn broke, the trucks were still moving. The Red Ball Express would not die. As winter approached, how much more could the human spirit endure before breaking? By September 1944, the Allied advance had slowed to a crawl. Paris was free, but the road east had turned into a maze of mud, exhaustion, and shattered bridges. The Red Ball Express, that thundering artery of supply, was stretched to the breaking point. Drivers slept in their seats, convoys grew thinner, and fuel lines that once roared now sputtered. But amid fatigue and danger, a spark of hope refused to die. Morale flickered alive through one belief shared across the muddy camps and dusty depots. Victory was close. They could feel it. Commanders began reorganizing the chaos. Engineers redrew road maps. MPs rerouted convoys, and dispatchers created a rhythm where there had been only confusion. Patton himself, now deep inside France, understood the miracle these men sustained. "My men can eat their belts," he said, "but my tanks gotta have gas." New systems emerged from necessity. Mechanics built mobile workshops from wrecked trucks, setting up roadside repair posts under camouflage netting. Radio operators coordinated convoys using hand-drawn grids. And in every depot, young soldiers, many barely 20, learned to manage a mechanical symphony of engines, tires, and timing. The drivers, still mostly African-American troops from segregated units, became the backbone of the Allied push. They named their trucks, painted slogans on the hoods, and found courage in music, humor, and sheer willpower. As they rolled eastward, innovation became survival. When German aircraft strafed the roads, convoys dispersed into forests, waited, then regrouped. When bridges collapsed, soldiers built new crossings overnight. Each adaptation was another nail in the coffin of Nazi control. But even as progress resumed, whispers began to spread of something dark brewing beyond the horizon. German prisoners spoke of a last offensive, a desperate counterblow that would come when the weather turned cold. Few believed it. Most thought the enemy was finished. Still, supply officers read the reports and felt a chill. The Red Ball Express had outrun destruction before, but the coming winter promised something far more brutal. Not just snow and ice, but a storm of steel and fury that could unravel everything. The men kept driving, unaware that they were racing not only against time, but toward the edge of the war's deadliest test. Would the Red Ball Express withstand the final storm, or collapse when the war's darkest winter arrived? December 1944. The Ardennes, a frozen forest where silence hid danger. Then, at dawn, the quiet shattered. German tanks burst through the fog, and the Battle of the Bulge had begun. It was Hitler's last gamble, a desperate attempt to split the Allies and reclaim momentum. But it also became the greatest test of the Red Ball Express. As snow choked the roads and temperatures plunged below freezing, supply lines were torn apart. Bridges vanished under bombardment. The Luftwaffe returned to the skies, hunting convoys from above. Yet the demand for fuel only grew. Every drop mattered. Without it, Patton's tanks, the spear of the counteroffensive, would stall in the snow. Drivers faced a nightmare of whiteouts, mines, and enemy ambushes. Trucks skidded on ice-slick hills. Engines froze solid, and men lost fingers to frostbite while changing tires. Some convoys were hit by artillery, others by falling trees from explosions. Still, the wheels turned. Patton ordered his men to pivot north to relieve Bastogne, a besieged town surrounded by German forces. To do it, he needed 400,000 gallons of fuel in 48 hours. The Red Ball Express answered. Convoys thundered through the blizzard, headlights blacked out, guided only by instinct and faint glows from cigarettes in the dark. The road became a living thing, pulsing with motion, danger, and resolve. At one checkpoint, a lieutenant counted 900 trucks passing in a single night. They carried fuel, rations, ammunition, and hope. When Patton's tanks finally reached Bastogne, engines roaring through the snow, they had been fed entirely by that unbroken chain of trucks. The siege was lifted. The German advance faltered. The Battle of the Bulge marked the last major German offensive of the war, and the moment when the Red Ball Express proved itself unbreakable. Still, victory came at a heavy cost. Hundreds of drivers never returned. Convoys vanished without word, swallowed by snow and smoke. Those who survived bore the scars of exhaustion, frostbite, and fear. As the snow melted and Allied flags rose once more across the Ardennes, the Red Ball Express rolled on toward Germany. Now that the end was in sight, what price had been paid by the men behind the wheel? Spring 1945. Germany was collapsing. The once mighty Reich lay in fragments, its cities bombed, its armies shattered. Allied columns advanced from the west, Soviet divisions from the east. The end was near. For the men of the Red Ball Express, it was both triumph and tragedy. Their mission was nearly over, yet the toll it had taken was immense. The convoys had delivered nearly 500,000 tons of supplies, fuel, food, and ammunition that made victory possible. But the human price was staggering. Drivers were lost to ambushes, accidents, fatigue, and sheer overwork. Some had gone weeks without proper rest, driving until their vision blurred, their hands locked around the wheel. Many were African American soldiers who returned home to silence, their bravery unrecognized, their contributions erased from headlines. For years, the world celebrated generals and battles, while the men who kept the armies alive were forgotten. Yet within the ranks, they knew what they had accomplished. They had carried an army across a continent. They had fed the fight for freedom, and they had done it with courage that defied the prejudice of their own nation. When the final German surrender came in May, Europe erupted in jubilation. Church bells rang, crowds filled the streets, and Allied flags waved from rooftops. But in the depots and truck parks, engines went quiet. The Red Ball Express, once the lifeline of the front, was suddenly obsolete. The trucks were parked, many abandoned in open fields. Tires sank into mud, metal rusted under rain. Soldiers packed their duffels and prepared to go home. Few medals were handed out. Fewer stories were told. Yet history cannot move without its wheels, and victory would have stalled without theirs. For decades, their tale was whispered, not written, until historians began to uncover the truth. Letters, photos, and diaries revealed the courage of the forgotten drivers. Would the world ever remember the soldiers who fueled victory, not with bullets, but with bravery? Years later, historians would look back and realize that the Red Ball Express was more than logistics, it was legend. Between August and November 1944, over 6,000 trucks had moved day and night, feeding an army across a continent. Its legacy stretched far beyond the war itself. The methods born from chaos, decentralized routes, rapid repairs, driver coordination, became the blueprint for modern military logistics. The lessons learned on French roads still shape how armies move today. But its deepest legacy was human. Many of its drivers were African-American soldiers serving in segregated units, men who faced discrimination at home, yet risked their lives for a freedom not fully granted to them. Behind every truck's roar was a story of endurance and quiet defiance. When the U.S. Army was desegregated in 1948, the Red Ball Express stood as proof that courage and competence know no color. Its veterans became mechanics, engineers, teachers, and leaders who carried their discipline into civilian life. Museums today display the red circle insignia with pride, a speeding truck over a bold background, symbolizing movement, strength, and resolve. Visitors pause before those exhibits and see the faces of young men who refuse to stop. Their courage bridged continents. Their endurance turned the tide of war. Their story reminds us that victory depends not only on who fights, but on who keeps the fight alive. What can today's world learn from those who kept the wheels of freedom turning? The Red Ball Express stands as a monument to human determination, a reminder that wars are not won by generals alone, but by the countless hands that keep the engines of victory running. In the mud of France, under the scream of bombs and the glare of headlights blacked out for safety, ordinary men did extraordinary things. They didn't fight for medals or fame. They fought to keep others fighting, and in doing so, they carried a nation's hope across a broken continent. Their engines roared through nights without rest. Their tires carved freedom's path from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany. And though their names seldom appeared in the newspapers, their courage fueled every triumph the world would celebrate. German generals once mocked American logistics, claiming the U.S. Army could build but not move. Yet when Patton's tanks rolled unbroken across Europe, their treads drinking fuel from an endless chain of trucks, that laughter turned to silence. Today, their story stands not only in military museums, but in the legacy of every soldier who drives into danger, every convoy that refuses to stop, and every nation that understands victory demands unity and sacrifice. The Red Ball Express was more than a mission. It was proof of what humanity can achieve when courage meets necessity, when ordinary men shoulder impossible burdens and refuse to quit. Let us remember them, the men who kept the wheels of freedom turning, so that their courage and their road are never forgotten.